Hello, I'm Sheila Burrows and I work for Bristol Blue. I've been appointed Project Manager for the relocation of the Finance and IT Department from its current premises in Kingswood in Bristol into the main head office in Haymarket in central Bristol. Within this overall project there is a sub-project for the refurbishment of the existing office location in Haymarket. This is currently occupied but will be vacated in preparation for the move. I needed to build an outline plan to determine the tasks and timescales involved so that I can advise what activities need to happen when and to provide a basis for managing the project. In this short presentation I'll take you through the stages of building a network diagram for a project and establishing the critical activities and critical path. Most of the time you use something like Microsoft Project to do this kind of thing, but it's worth understanding the rules and disciplines so you can do it with just some post-it notes and a whiteboard or flip chart. First of all, I took all of the activities that I could think of that were associated with the project and wrote them on post-it notes. I knew this would help me if I missed anything, which I did, and would make it easier to move things around as I worked out what needed to happen before what. I established two milestones, basically the beginning and end of the project. The first milestone I called Office Layout Confirmed, the point at which we knew how many people would be using the office and how the seating and desks, etc. could be or would be arranged. The other one I labelled Office Complete. This would mean the office was ready to hand over to the incoming finance department. In between these, I started to work out what fitted together and what came before what. Some things were obvious, confirming lighting before ordering, for example. Some other things only became obvious as I pictured the order, laying the carpets before painting and decorating was possible, but a bad idea if it could be avoided. I stuck the post-it notes up on a sheet of flip chart on the wall to help me see the overall picture. To make it easier and quicker to talk about each milestone, task or activity, I gave each one a letter. I avoided I and O, obviously, and decided to make the milestones A and Z. I drew arrows to join the activities together and make sure it was clear what was linked, and in particular what preceded what. In a couple of cases I realised some things would go on in parallel, but there were clear dependencies between others. For example, H, specify office carpeting, and J, specify paint and wall covering, were parallel, but both depended on the colour scheme being chosen, task D. As I said earlier, I also realised the carpet must be laid after the painting and decorating, and both must be complete before the furniture arrived. With the map starting to take shape, I added durations for each activity. These were guesses, of course, but based on my experience, I knew decisions would take at least a day, and where there were safety or legislative considerations, somewhat longer. I allowed a day for ordering because raising the PO and getting signatures from the relevant directors always takes some time. Electrical work and painting and decorating is being done by our facilities department. I knew they would have to liaise with the finance department, IT and the building owners to confirm requirements, so I allowed more time for that. Obviously there would be lead times for delivery of some items. With this in mind, I added that time to the activity I'd called Deliver and Install. So I assumed a day for the actual delivery of carpet, furniture and things like fire extinguishers and safety signs. On top of this, I added 15 days to allow for that lead time. I did an extra day in the case of lighting to allow for any adjustments to the electrical works. The activities A and Z were, of course, not actually activities, but milestones. Since a milestone is just a marker, there is no duration as such, so I marked both of these with a duration of 0 days. The map now pretty much matched my thinking. I could see that lighting, furniture and safety equipment were the last stages before handover, and as far as I could see, the order of doing things was logical and the duration was realistic. Maybe a little over-cautious in some cases, but I'd rather have time to spare than be promising on something that I didn't think we could deliver. I checked it out with Fahim, the finance director, and facilities. They also agreed the timescales were reasonable, although they wanted to be more precise about when they needed actually to book the staff to do the work. I knew that, so I moved on to calculate when things would happen in relation to the start date. Rather than put actual dates, I used day numbers. I could quite quickly work out the actual dates later by referring to a calendar. I also knew that this kept the plans still usable if the start date, that first milestone A, office layout confirmed, changed for some reason. Everything started on day 0. Nothing needed to happen between milestone A and the first of the actual activities, so B, C, D, E and F all could start on day 0, a busy day. Because I was going to be sharing this plan with other people, I decided I would photograph the flip chart when it was finished. I put a key on the bottom so people could understand the numbers. I was going to calculate the earliest start and latest start for each activity, and also how much float or slack I had. That means the amount of time an activity will slip without affecting the project progress. This would also help me later in identifying which activities must not slip and were therefore what is known as critical. This is a pretty laborious process and not one where you want to be disturbed halfway through. Calculating the earliest start is pretty straightforward. You take the previous earliest start and add the duration of the activity you're looking at. Then that number is the earliest the next activity can start. So for example, activity M, order fire and safety equipment, is dependent on activity B, confirm fire and safety equipment, finishing. Activity B starts on day 0 and takes 3 days, so activity M cannot start before day 3, 0 plus 3. Activity R is activity M's start date plus the duration of 2, so R's earliest start date is 5, 3 plus 2. The maths is all pretty straightforward, just simple addition. Where it gets slightly more complicated and impossible without having a map like this is where 2 activities come together before another one. For example, G, order office furniture, starts on day 2 and has a duration of 1, so the next activity, S, could start on day 3. Except that activity T also has to be complete. Remember that carpet. And that is also dependent on painting and decorating being done, and that is in turn dependent on the electrics. So if I follow each of these streams from left to right, I add each one and take the highest number. Office furniture cannot be delivered before day 30 at the earliest. The carpet has to be in, the painting done, and the electrics in place. There's bound to be stuff under the floor. Well, that's a bit of a surprise. 46 days from beginning to end. I had thought it would be quicker. Perhaps we can make up some time somewhere, but for the moment I'm going to go with these dates. So, milestone Z, office complete. The end of our office refurbishment journey will happen on day 46. Given it's the last point in the project, the latest start is the same as the earliest start, day 46. Now, to calculate the latest start dates, this is effectively the same process but backwards. So a clear head, a quiet place, and a large cup of coffee is probably a good idea. Oh, and a pencil, since it's nearly always wrong at some point. So, working backwards from Z, I take the latest start date and subtract the duration of the activity I'm calculating. Activity R, deliver and install fire and safety equipment, then 46 minus 16 equals 30. So the latest start date for activity R is 30. Thinking about it was pretty obvious. If I left it until day 30, I still have 16 days for lead time, delivery and installation of the furniture to hit the day 46 deadline. Tight, but possible. So the calculations are subtracting and working backwards from right to left across the map. It's not as hard as it sounds, but it does take concentration. Activity M, order fire and safety equipment, latest start day is 28. The day 30 in R, less the duration of M. 30 minus 2 equals 28. The only complication this time is at that junction where H and J come out from D. If we took the branch from H back to D, the answer would be 11, 12 minus 1. But this time we've got to find the smallest number, not the largest. So the J route calculates as 8. The painting or wall covering has to be started sooner. The latest we can start the activity D, confirm colour schemes, is day 8. To calculate the float or slack time for each activity, I look at the latest start and earliest start numbers and take one from the other. So activity D, for example, has a latest start date of 8 and an earliest start date of 0. That gives me a float of 8. What that means is, if I'm late starting that activity, I've got up to 8 days in hand before I'm in trouble. Of course, if I do start it later than day 0, all the earliest starts along that chain will be affected, and they'll have a bit less slack too, but I'll still make it. In technical terms, these activities are not critical. There's some slack or float in them. Not so for activities with 0 float. These are the ones which, if they slip, everything slips. On my map, E, K and P all have 0 float, so do V, T and S. These activities together form what is called the critical path. I've got to keep an eye on everything, but these need particular attention, and I want to make sure everyone is clear that missing deadlines on these affects the whole project. Since this map is to communicate to everyone what the plan is and what needs to be given time, attention and resources, I've highlighted the critical path, and this is what's on my wall. I've photographed it and sent it to everyone that needs to know, particularly facilities. I've got to make sure that there are no delays here, but I've also got to look and see what risks might arise along this path. These risks will become some of the highest priorities if we don't want to be late. So when I'm planning to mitigate risks, I'll pay particular attention to these. Time for another coffee.